How are we doing? Any new folks in there?
No, no new folks. I just texted Sally. I'm gonna get Veronica, and that'd be actually so. That would be the last one because Xavier and Quinn are here, right?
Okay. Yep. Yep. All righty. So yeah, let's start at 20.
I just optimize and even. Makes sense. All right. Everybody has now received a courtesy text at least.
All right. Great. Well, for those of you who are here, if you wouldn't mind turning on your video so we can see your smiling face. There we go. That's better. Well, hope everybody had a nice, relaxing weekend while you were doing your work. And I was thinking a lot about you guys this weekend, and I was exploring some areas. I went and did a little backpacking, and I'm going to utilize my screen share to show you where, because this is a good way to introduce you to ArcGIS, which is what we're going to glance on talking about today, or at least discuss your hand-drawn map exercise that we're going to do together here. So let's see. Let me just get to this. Okay. One screen share. Boom. Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you guys. There we go. So this is just a map that I've been utilizing a lot, but I'm going to take you from where. So this platform that I'm using here is something that we're going to be discussing a lot and getting into more. This is Arcgis Pro. And so this is just kind of what I want to show you, what we're going to be working, that all the data you collect, whether it's about your plant community or whether it's about your social dynamics, these are all things that we're going to input into this system. But what I wanted to show you was a really cool place here in the Olympics that I had the opportunity to go do a little hiking in this weekend, that might be actually close to some of your backyards. So there's Shelton, and then just north of Shelton here, there's a beautiful place within Olympic National Park called Upper Lena Lake. Have you guys ever heard of Upper Lena Lake? No? Well, it is quite a special place. So here's actually Lower Lena Lake, which is a very popular camp site. But this is just a good way to show you how powerful GIS is. So, this is, as we go in layer upon layer here, we can get deeper and deeper into the forest. And we can actually see this, this green line here is the national park. This area here is the national forest. And there's a lake here. Yeah, there's a lake here, but then there's also a lake up here. And so this is where Upper Lena Lake is, right in here. So anyway, this is just a nice tool that we're going to be using that really allows us to do a lot of cool mapping. And one of the other things I want to show you that we're going to work on kind of today is working on creating a map, that's very simple. So this is an example of a map that was also made in GIS, but just looking at the peaks and cities of Yellowstone. So, what we're going to do in today's class activity is really try to get a a better understanding of our own environments around us. So, you know, you guys have, as I'm sure you've become, if you weren't before, intimately aware with your home surroundings. Today we're going to map that surrounding. So let me get to, I just want to make sure I'm staying on course with our syllabus here. So what I'm going to want everybody to do today, and oh, my screen sharing is paused, okay, is really just working to kind of get a sense of what a map is and what you like to represent in your map. So, you know, these are like the map that we showed here at the beginning that's on the syllabus. You know, this is a much more complex map that actually is utilizing data that's.
Your screen share isn't coming across on my end, at least. I don't know about it.
Oh, okay. Let's try that again. Let me stop it. Yeah, I think it paused there or something. So we will get one back to that. Okay, so where were we here? Okay, so let's back up here, screen share. Okay. Is that better? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Great. All right, so so for today, what we are going to try and do is basically create a map somewhat similar to this. You know, we're not, in this case, we're not looking at the peaks and cities of Yellowstone as much as we are looking at maybe let's say the aspects of your home, of, you know, places you sleep, places you eat, places you recreate, places other people have and do things in your home or outside your home. Maybe you've got a garden somewhere, maybe you've got you know, some flowers planted. Basically, this is just a very basic map that we're going to create today by drawing by hand. So so I'm going to attempt to share another screen here and show you kind of how I would do it. So let's see, I think I can go to let's go stop share, and then I'm going to go share again, and this time I'm going to use the whiteboard. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through how we're going to do this as a class today, and then you don't have to utilize my map per se, but this is just an example of how I would draw a map for my home where I'm at. So let's see here. Drawing on the computer is always tricky. So you can draw, as we do these maps today, guys, you can draw them by hand on paper, or if you want to draw them on the computer, you can. You know, I'm really leaving this up to you. Really, the purpose of today's exercise is really just to get a sense of, you know, where we're at, what's going on around us, and how do we want to depict information. So in my case, I'm going to draw, this is very crude, but you get the idea. So this is kind of the lay of my land. All right, so I've got my office here. I've got, let's see, this is my this is my little deck. So we've got here's my here's my bed. Here's my desk that I'm working from here to talk to you all. So anyway, this is, and then let's say like, okay, north is actually this way for me, even though I'm facing south. So this is just a crude example of, you know, this is my bed. So you can go through, you can label things, if you want to, let's say I'm going to change it up here. Now I'm going to try and create, let's do a, let's see, how about, I'm going to change it to green. And now in green, I'm going to use, let's say, in green here, I'm going to put out my plants. So this is where, I've got some plants of multiple varieties. Maybe I, don't want to draw each plant out, but I can, the green might be a good symbol. So then over here, I'm going to start my key, which is to say, it's going to bear with me. It's not going to be the best, but it's going to be, get the point across here. So this is an example where I'm going to say these are plants. So that way, everybody knows that when they're looking at the green, oh, these are Graham's plants out here. Whereas if I go back to black, we'll say the black is, let's say, black is indoors. So, just some way of breaking down maybe some things that you have repeated, but, then you can label things just to show, where things are. That's my desk. Here's my patio. And let's see, what's some other stuff that's of significance for me? Well, I've also got, I'm going to change it up now, and I'm going to put in, let's do my terrariums, which I showed you at the beginning. So these are along my desk here. These are very important to me because I'm always trying to keep them alive. So I spend a lot of time looking at them. So that might be over here, a new box, which might be, we'll call them the biomes. So that just gives you kind of a really brief idea of what we're going to try and do today. So if you have, colored pencils, or you have markers, or I don't know if we got you that, or how.
Markers and paper.
We got you markers and paper. Okay, great. So yeah, let's just, because I think doing this on the computer is a little difficult. Let's just have them do it. Let's have you guys do it on the paper and markers that you got. So just for today, I want you just to really draw out the footprint of your home or place, and then but make sure you leave some area around it to describe your surrounding area. So if you've got, if you live on a big acreage, then make sure that can all fit within the map. And then in that case, your home might be a little smaller, or if you're like me, you just live in a small apartment, this is pretty much my I've got a few more plants over here that I can, that I can denote. Oh boy, it's getting a little crazy here. So I've got a few more plants over here, like that are in pots, so I might do that. But really for me, this is pretty much, as much as I got. So, so with that, are there any questions about this activity or things I can?
Yeah, somebody asked a question in the
I just answered it.
What's that?
Somebody asked a question in the chat. They said they have to do it on paper. They can't do it. They can't do it online.
Oh, you could do it online too. That's fine. It's more whatever's comfortable for you. And I think that in the case of this, it's whatever's easiest for you, whatever you think is going to allow you to create the best map of your area. So if like I showed you, doing it on the computer is fine, but you can see like mine, I'm not as good with it, so I can't quite control my pen as well, that I feel like I could do better with a paper map. So whatever works best for you. This is really just an observational activity, just kind of a way to generate a map on your own that you have total control over. And that's really to kind of facilitate you into thinking about how we're going to make maps down the line. So really getting to thinking about what information you want to share with the map. How do you share it? How does somebody who looks at one map, how are they going to find all the information that they need? Because maybe you know your home, but maybe someone like Amr or I or Philip want to get to know the area better too. So that's the whole purpose of the map. So yeah, I see some other questions in the chat. Are there anything? Oh yeah, that's Amr's. Okay. So yeah, if that works for folks, then let's do it. And then I'm going to prepare. While you guys are doing that, I'm going to prepare for the next lecture I'm going to give, talking about plants. So just bear along here, and let's just give ourselves, let's say like 15 minutes to start this activity, and then we'll wrap back up together and look at our progress. This is not a finished product necessarily today, so if you want to keep working on it through the class, that's fine, or even while I'm talking. I know sometimes some people actually listen better when they're doing something. So, as you listen to me talk about plants and their evolution today, that can also be an option while you're listening. So, does that sound good to everyone? Everyone comfortable with that? Okay, great. Well, map away, and I will look forward to seeing your progress here in about 15 minutes. Let's see. I share music. That's another question. Probably not while we're listening. No, we'll just. Oh, Amr, you're turned off.
Oopsies. Yes, because there was like a truck going by earlier. Just make sure it's not copyrighted, because we are recording.
Yeah, I think I'll just if you guys have music you want to listen to, go ahead and listen to that music while you map. I think we don't want to get in any more copyright trouble here. So, all right, guys, I'll see you in 15. Come back here at 11. Let's see, yeah, 11:50. Sound good? Cool.
When we're done, do you want us to email it to you?
Great question, Courtney. If you are done with it, you can, instead of emailing it to us, why don't you make sure to upload it to Canvas? Because there should be a place in Canvas to upload that map. And that will be good for us so we can keep track of them in one place.
Okay, I can try.
Okay, if you have problems, let me know, because probably other people will need some help too.
And I think everybody in the room right now at least has their Canvas access, right? Like we only had a
Yeah.
couple students that were waiting on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're current. Hopefully by this week, everyone will be.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I got some, I got one of the emails you sent me, somebody's response for brain sweetgrass, so I just figured I'll upload that for them.
Well, we can't like post on their behalf is the thing, right? Like.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, or I'll just keep make note of that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, until it's all sorted, at least we've got sort of our secondary tracking sheet. So
yeah, and for me, guys, like just so you know, in these with all these hiccups, the due dates for my stuff, is pretty much as the technology comes along. So don't stress up it too much, at least in the beginning here.
Yeah, I should say as well that I will still accept late work as well, although I am a little bit perturbed by how many folks haven't been turning in responses and stuff.
Yeah, I think that we need to get in the groove here as we find our pace. Alrighty. So if everybody's at a good stopping point or share point, why don't you turn your screens back on and we'll see what progress you've made. So what we're actually doing today with these hand-drawn maps, just as a precursor to the other mapping we're going to do, is really what in the mapping world we would call cartography. So mapping breaks down into lots of different categories, but cartography is really the more artistic side of map making. So how you choose, what layout do you have? These are all aesthetic choices, but at the end of the day, they do communicate what you are trying to say visually. So why don't we get a couple shares here? Who wants to go first?
Oh, you're both muted, so we can't hear you.
Yeah, let's hear those.
Or actually, you're all muted, I should say.
Oh, Xavier, what do you want to unmute and say what you want me to say again? Or all of you?
I was just asking what you guys wanted.
Oh, so what we're looking for is that hand-drawn map. So just the map that we worked on just the past 15 minutes. We're just going to hop right into my plant evolution lecture. So I guess if you did it digitally, we could let you screen share it if that's what you did.
Or you can paste a link into the chat as well. It is share out time though.
Yeah.
Can you repeat your question?
Oh, can we just see the maps that you were working on or you've made as part of the activity?
I'm trying to get it into Canvas.
Okay.
I'm having some difficulty, so it's taking me a while.
All right. Well, then in this case, let's just move forward to the lecture, and by the end of class today, I want to make sure everybody's at the point of being able to share something. Okay. Cool.
Yep. And as Graham said earlier, you can keep working on it, like as the lecture is being delivered. I actually had a friend in graduate school who could not concentrate unless he was doodling Spider-Man.
Well, there you go. So see, there's lots of learning styles here, and that's what I want you guys to pick up on too. Is oh, maybe I didn't know I actually listen better when I do that. So if you want to continue working on your map, please do, because if it's even more powerful and well done at the end of the class, that's even better. So but with that, I am going to transition into a PowerPoint I have that's on plant evolution. So, we're going to be taught really what Amr and I are really trying to get you guys to tune into through this course is really just about adaptation and evolution. We live in an interesting time where you're getting to see a lot of social adaptation and actually with the virus, actual biological adaptation and mutation. And I think it's an important message to understand that, so many things are fighting to survive, whether it's the virus or whether it's us. And so, what I want to hopefully share with you is some of the pathways of adaptation and survival that plants have taken, because they have really been at it for a while, but actually not as long as you might think. I find it, when I first started learning about plants, I was fascinated to learn that things have been living in the ocean longer than they've been living on land. So plants are actually a recent feature, but ultimately did really guide us to the world we have today. So let's see, I am going to share my screen here. I can get into, here we go. Can everybody see that? Yep, okay, great. Then I'm going to see if I can just do straight up. There we go. Okay, so this is a picture from a place I've spent a lot of time working with plants. This is the Salmon River Estuary. So I like this photo because you get to see a multitude of ecosystems in one shot. So we're in the estuary here. We have plants that have evolved to very specific conditions to that estuary. Right now, this is Carex ligui, which is a very much dependent on freshwater and saltwater mixing. So this is a really unique plant that you only find in these this sort of regime of water where it's mixing saltwater and freshwater, which is what the estuary is. So very cool picture that also depicts part of the coastal prairie that I'm doing my research on. That I'll be sharing in more and more detail as time goes on with you guys. But for today, we're going to talk about the adaptations of how plants came to live on land, because basically all plants that you see today really were derived from one type of plant. So that's what we refer to as monophyletic, meaning that there's one common ancestor for everything that you see today. And that actually comes from an algae. So that algae was originally, in the ocean and was living just in the water. And then it wasn't until it evolved, it adapted to be able to live on land. So, this is just some of the the adaptations that land plants had to develop. So algae does not have what we call vascular tissue. So vascular tissue is basically, who knows what the word vascular means? When you talk about something being vascular, what do you usually associate that with? Because in us, if you go to see, let's say, a vascular surgeon, that would be somebody who would be looking at your heart and looking at your vascular makeup. So vascular in us is blood and our veins that pump it through our body and move, everything that we need: oxygen, water, food, nutrients. So just like plants, we have a vascular system. And ours is, is very different, but still does the same thing. So when we're talking about algae and other things that live in water, they don't have vascular tissue because water is what they use to move a lot of those nutrients around. So, so those transport vessels are really important to defining what a plant is. So there are four main groups of plants that we're going to talk about in relationship to their evolution. So we've got bryophytes such as mosses, and then ferns, and then conifers, as well as flowering plants. So today we're going to look at how do we get these four major group of plants, because they did evolve in this order, with bryophytes, mosses at the top, and then moving into ferns and the other plants. But they also, what I think is cool about plants and what I want to share with you guys is that, life builds on itself. So the forms that you see today, because we can trace them back to the original common ancestor, we can see some of the commonalities across each one of these groups. So this is what the basically the living ancestor of all plants that we have today is this green algae. So this is just a nice picture of what probably the first plant looked like. This other plant up top here is another horsetail, a modern day version of a terrestrial plant that also is in the same family. But yeah, these are, very important, a very important piece of evolution was one of these earlier counties. So,
You're definitely gonna have to repeat like that last sentence. That was bad connection problems there.
oh, okay. So yeah, this green algae though is really where things came from. So, and I'm gonna do at the end of all this, to sum it all up, I'm gonna do a pictorial lecture. I'm gonna visually show you what we're talking about here and how each one of these steps occurred. So this is a lecture I've also given some adults. So I'm gonna move through some parts. There's a lot of content here, and I don't think that we need to know all of it today. But these are some important characteristics for life on land. So one of the things that so this this idea of how did plants come to be today? Well, there were many things they had to do. They really had to localize regions in their body to develop shoots and roots. So many things that if you were living in water, you wouldn't have to do. So that's what we're seeing plants developing things like walled spores to protect their seeds or multicellular reproductive structures that allow them to procreate. So what is a plant? And that once again, these are part of their adaptation. So multicellular eukaryote that are photosynthetic autotrophs. Now that's a lot of words, I know, but we're going to unpack that. So multicellular means there's multiple cells.
You just cut out again. Sorry.
Oh, okay. It's okay. How about that? Is that any better?
Yeah. It's literally just a connection issue, not like a mic issue, right? So sometimes it just distorts heavily, and I'm just trying to let you know so that folks who watch this later, right?
Betcha. Thank you for noting that. I'll just let me know when I need to repeat, and I will. So what does it mean to be multicellular? You have lots of cells. What does it mean to be a eukaryote? That would be many things are eukaryotes. So plants are eukaryotes. We are eukaryotes. Basically, it's a type of organism that has multiple cells. So photosynthetic. Now, photosynthetic is something that we are not, meaning that we cannot sit out in the sunshine and produce our own food, which is what autotrophs do. So autotrophs mean they can produce their own food. They don't, as opposed to us, which we are heterotrophs. So we need to eat other things in order to produce our energy. So plants are autotrophs. Now, if you go to the bottom of the sea and you find bacteria living on extreme heat vents or something, those are actually called chemotrophs. So those are a whole different class of animal that we're gonna have to get into, but just know that plants are autotrophs, we are heterotrophs. So plants have cell walls that are made of cellulose. That's what make plants green and tough. That is an adaptation to life on land as well, because that was a way of keeping that vascular tissue together, holding the water. Many things like algae do not have as much cellulose. They do have some, but not as much. And then that cellulose helps store carbohydrates and starch from uptaking from the sun and the water that they are.
Things cut out.
Okay, so the carbohydrates and starch are what are basically the sugars that are created when plants absorb sunlight and water and do their autotrophic production. So, and that's why they're mostly terrestrial, because you have more sun and you have more of what plants like on land. So that's why you don't see trees growing in the ocean. They didn't evolve that way. All right, so now we're going to move into some of the other things that plants do. So there's other secondary productions that they do, and they have to protect themselves. So they have let's see, synthesize side branches for metabolic pathway. That's basically just means that they've got other ways of metabolizing and producing in case they get, one part of them gets knocked off. They're not gonna be able to not photosynthesize anymore. That's one of the other cool things about plants is that they have, the same thing that helps them do what they need to do in multiple parts of their body. And that's largely to protect against things like deer and other herbivores. They're gonna munch on the plant. So of the examples of some of these productions, lignin I think is the most important one. Lignin is basically what allows trees to grow straight and strong. So that's an example of something too that protects from herbivores, because with the exception of beaver, you don't find too many animals eating straight tree. So that's, I think, a good example of one thing that plants have been able to do to survive. So let's see, we're just going to go over that. So alternations of generations. So life cycles in all plants. So they're, you go from this haploid condition to diploid. So that's where this idea of how do plants evolve? Well, this is the mechanism that they use. So, you've got a zygote, which is it basically is the first thing that a plant puts out. Maybe that's a pollen. It would be a zygote in this case. And then once it hits the other, the other plant, that's when meiosis happens. So that's when you will get the sporophyte, and then becoming in contact with the other reproductive part of the plant to then create this multicellular. So you're getting, one pollen from one place or from another, or a flower from another place, and combining those together to then create a new organ life form. So that's where plants have had to overcome a lot of things, because being able to get to combining those two things, combining pollen or combining a female part of the plant to be able to raise seeds, lots of things that they had to overcome. So in doing that, they've got to conserve water, they've got to absorb minerals, and in addition, avoid all those predators that want to eat them.
What they have to overcome, Graham?
Oh, they have to overcome predators, things that want to eat them. They have to overcome things that they need to absorb. So they need to absorb things out of the ground, such as minerals. But at the same time, they need to conserve water, because as we all know, when you don't water a plant, it dries up. So that's where we can talk a little bit more about stomata. So every day when plants wake up and the sun comes out, they open their stomata. So this stomata is really a lot of where plants had to figure out how to do that correctly to live on land, because even though when a plant opens its stomata, it is absorbing, actually, good question for the class. What does a plant absorb when it opens its stomata? What do we know about plants? What do they derive from the air? What do they need to grow? Anybody? Okay. Well, they need CO2. So actually they need carbon dioxide, which is something that we produce a lot of by burning plants. So that's actually what every day when plants wake up, just like you and me, we open up our eyes, they open up their stomata. And that stomata is basically there to allow gas exchange. So allow the plant to absorb the gases that they need to be able to produce their own food, because you can't just there's the Krebs cycle that we'll talk about in more detail about how plants actually convert sunlight to sugar, but that requires gases, CO2 as well. So it's this delicate balance with the stomata, having your stomata open enough to get all those gases, but at the same time, when plants open those stomata up, they also dehydrate themselves, because when they open the stomata, water is what comes out as well. So that's actually what creates a lot of climate too, because if you've ever noticed, let's say over the Olympics, there's a very good chance that it's going to be cloudy over there. And a lot of times that has to do with the fact that plants are releasing water on a daily basis into the atmosphere. So, you know, plants also, in addition to colonizing the land, they have changed the way that land, that much of the what we call abiotic factors function on land too. So that being rain and sun, and as opposed to the biotic factors, which would be the plants themselves. So we're going to move to the next. So yes, so vascular system enables plants to thrive on land by providing them the plumbing that they need. So that's really, you know, moving all those nutrients around, just like us, right? You know, if you've got somebody who's got a clogged artery or something, they're not going to be doing so well because their plumbing system can't move what they need through their bodies. So plants are very similar. So this is just a nice visual. I know we talk, it's sometimes hard to realize how long ago these things happened, but you know, here's basically what we're talking about in terms of the evolution of plants. And these are the scientific names up here, but I'm just going to tell you the common names because it's more valuable for you. So these are green algae. This beginning here back in 600 million years ago was basically when plants started to proliferate in the ocean as algae. But then not only until, you know, about 570 million years ago, that's really when plants came to land. So liverworts and hornworts and mosses, those are all in the what we would call non-vascular plants, right? So they are plants, but they don't necessarily have the vascular tissue that ferns and conifers and other flowering plants have. So they're kind of this intermediary link. Amr, question.
Yeah, what are liverworts and hornworts? I've never heard those terms before. And I also wonder if students know what conifers are, even though that's a point.
Good point. So good question. And that, I think, actually brings us to, let's see, here's what they look like. So here's an example of non-vascular plants. So this would be like this is a liverwort here in the, yeah, it's actually kind of dark, but you can see on the top corner there. So they're kind of like, you know, you can actually, and this is a pretty good picture because you can see, notice how the leaves, what I'm calling leaves, don't actually have any veins. You can kind of see there's like this one kind of backbone to each leaf, but there are no veins. So that's like, liverworts are a really good example to show you how a kind of non-vascular plant that is a plant, however, it doesn't have vascular tissue to move nutrients around. So that's why also they can't grow very tall or can't be away from water. So that's where you can see kind of some of the original aspects of the plant that would that you can, you know, it's still evolved only for those wetter environments as opposed to being able to live in a drier place. So these are, you know, sporangium. This is probably one that you've seen all over your backyard. Hornworts, I've actually not seen a lot of them. I think they're more in the tropics, but, you know, still it gives you an idea of what those look like. And then mosses, here we've got some classic, just classic club moss. And these are its sporophytes up here. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these reproductive structures and how what we see here in mosses, was really paved the way towards the seed that we have today. So this is actually what conifers also evolved from. This sort of spore in the case of conifers, pollen. So just to clarify that question from before, what's a conifer? Does anybody know? Nope. Quinn, Xavier, you look like you're in deliberation.
Ask what he said.
What's a conifer?
It's a conifer?
Mhm.
I have no idea.
Isn't it one of those trees that like that drops its leaves or something?
Ooh, close, close. Well, the conifers are actually don't drop their leaves, so very good. And that would be what we would call a deciduous tree, a tree that loses its leaves. And deciduous trees are actually angiosperms, which if we go back here, angiosperms. So here you can see flowering plants. So actually, deciduous trees came around later than conifers. So, but we'll get back to that in a second. So, let's see where we at. Liverworts. So let's start with this. So looking at how plants had evolved to be on land, we can look at moss and we can look at how basically life started in this wet place and then had to move to a drier place. So actually, I think just in the interest of time and because this PowerPoint is pretty thick, I want to show you, let's see, yeah, here we go, this, because this I think is the best way to understand how mosses have been able to reproduce, and this will guide nicely into the drawing I'm going to do here for you in a second. So this is just an example of those. So remember those little white tops we saw? That's on the last picture of the moss. That's the sporangium. So those sporangium were really the first things that evolved to be able to help plants reproduce. Because before, plants would just reproduce in the ocean, in the case of green algae, as more of a division. You know, they wouldn't be creating new versions of themselves, more just old versions of themselves that they would divide out. So that's how plants first started. But the problem is, if you're just reproducing variations of yourself, you're not very good at being able to deal with things that might come up in the environment that might require you to adapt, because you're not going to have as much genetic diversity in your system to be able to evolve quickly due to different stressors. So that's really where plants came into the scene, because plants needed to be able to reproduce in order to be able to survive and stave off more threats that life on land posed. So this is just an example of how you can see, you know, here we've got the spores being released, and those spores fly around. And it's not actually until those spores hit another spore, in this case, here's the liverwort going, you know, basically this young gametophyte hits the liverwort in this case, and that's when reproduction happens. So then you get an egg and the sperm from this young gametophyte connecting with too many windows here, connecting with the liverwort to then create fertilization. Oh gosh. All right, so now if we look at something like a fern, that's how you get a new fern, right? Is you have this spore connecting with another spore or another another aspect of a fern. You know, two gametophytes come together, then you can create a new sporophyte and a new plant. So I'm just going to transition into drawing this out because there's a lot to cover here and we're running low on time. So 1 second, guys. How do I get back to Share, okay, screen share, new share, whiteboard. Okay. Clear this, clear. All right. So everybody can see my screen? Yep. Okay, great. So this is the best way I would describe it. Okay, so here's where we have our green algae. Starts here. Very small, you know. And then we are in the ocean. This is where our green algae is. Floating along, waiting to come up and connect with the land. Oops. Ah. No. All right, let's try this. All right, so here's land. And we're just gonna make it go up here because we're in the sound, so steep waterways well here. Okay, so basically the green algae came to land, and had to figure out, okay, now I've washed up on land. How do I get up higher and higher and colonize more new places and new ground that's drier? And I don't want to. I can't live. So the first thing they did was become like we were saying before, bryophytes. So they became mosses, and they became non-vascular plants. So here's an example of this, of a moss being, still has to be close to water, but it can live on land. And then these spores, right? These spores they send out, waiting to connect with another moss here, right? And then once they connect with that moss, then that's when we get new moss forms. And actually, we're going to say now we get into the newest form of plant, which is actually vascular plants. So ferns are really a good example of this cross link between what mosses kind of are and what plants are. So ferns are, they have no seeds, they have spores too, right? So the way that they actually reproduce is very similar to moss, except with the exception of the fact that they actually have vascular tissue. So they have veins and can move water up and down their bodies. However, they still need to release their spores and are in that sense limited, but because they have to, you have to have another fern that's releasing these spores in order for those two spores to then come together. Like here's two spores that come together, and then like we were looking in that picture, then those two spores can come together, not like a seed, right? That a seed actually is just one package of material that can go anywhere. Oh, we got somebody new. A seed is something that you can sit in itself for years and doesn't have to come into contact with necessarily another plant. So the fern, basically these two spores connect, then you get a brand new fern coming up. So the ferns can't move around a lot because their spores might only travel, 100 or, let's say 100 feet, or maybe they travel 10 miles, but still they're limited in some way by this spore-like way of reproducing. So the next way that plants overcame this limiting factor was actually then to create conifers. So that's where from ferns we move into, so we're in, we'll say ferns here, ferns, moss here. And then algae down here. All right, so then moving on to land, we have, so really conifers do show a nice intermediary link between ferns and what we see today, because what conifers do is pretty interesting. Conifers actually have male and female plants, right? So there is oftentimes, draw my conifer here. So if you've ever seen, let's say, what's a good example? If you've ever seen, yeah, you guys remember like about, April, when it was really kind of dry and everything was covered in yellow? Does anybody remember that? It was kind of thick, yeah, it was everywhere. Well, that was the conifers. So the conifers are basically releasing from their cones here. They're from the male tree, from the cones. Actually, let's change this to brown, to yellow, because that'll be a bit more accurate. So basically, they have these male, which the pollen is actually considered the male part of the plant, right? So the pollen was kind of like ferns, right? Released into the air. And in this case, instead of needing to connect with another, like with ferns, they require spores from another plant to be present in order to be able to create a new fern. Well, in the case of conifers, they overcame the need for finding another spore to finding cones. So in conifers, you've got basically, so you've got your pollen cones by the male tree, and sometimes these trees will also have both aspects on the same tree. That's a little later in evolution, but we're going to talk, we'll talk about it from the oldest standpoint. So basically, conifers, instead of requiring this need for two things to connect, can actually, if these pollen spores are in the air and they hit these cones, boom, you've got a new seed, right? Because you've got the pollen that's now fertilized the cones, and now you get a seed created. So now you're not relying on, just two spores coming into contact with each other, hopefully. You're actually, you've got all this pollen in the air, you've got all these female cones. So really, you put the pollen in the air, there's a pretty good chance it's going to come into contact with one of these female cones. So that was how conifers evolved. And then we're moving now into, and that was about 250 million years ago. So we're looking at here, we've got 600, and this is, big gaps of time here. But really, 600 million years ago, there was life in the sea. There were sharks and all sorts of stuff swimming around, but there were no land plants, right? Which is, I think, kind of a crazy thing to think about, because then it wasn't until 570, that moss came around. And then, not until the Devonian, about 400 million years ago, the ferns came around. And then we reach into conifers. Now we're starting, oops, that was supposed to be a 2. So now we're getting into the last stages of evolution. About 100 million years ago, we get the most diverse plant group that we have today, which is angiosperms. So angiosperms are, like we were talking about before, those deciduous trees. Let's see here. I'll do one of my favorite early angiosperms. I'll do a trillium. So angiosperms basically, once again, like we were talking about with with conifers, they were able to overcome this need for actually getting, well, basically the need for having pollen just widely distributed in the air, and having to have these two different reproductive parts into actually fusing them all together in one place, which is where their flower is. So their flower, in this case, has all the same features as we find in the cones, in the male and female cones of the conifers. But in this case, they're not putting it out in the air as much as they're putting it on to insects. So as life evolved on land, and that's the cool thing about plants, is plants really did tap into what was going on around them, right? Because as there were more and more insects around, that became a new way for basically plants to entice insects to come in to want to get some nectar, but then also have that bee or fly or whatever. Let's see if I draw a bumblebee here. Basically have that insect inadvertently move pollen from one plant to the next, and that then creates their ability to divide and conquer. So it's really important to, I think, see that there were lots of ways that plants came to live on land, but it was really dependent on what the situations were. So in the case of angiosperms, it was only because insects came around, but also due to the plants that facilitated hosting those insects. So I think that's one of the things that we can really learn from plants, is that there is this evolving song of cooperation between the world around you and what's happening. So I know that's a lot of stuff. I think we're getting low on time here, but does that at least give you guys a sense of what we're talking about, or what I'm trying to teach you? Okay, great. So yeah, questions, ideas, things that I can clarify. It's a lot of material here, and I gotta say, I'm learning how to deliver this better too.
So would that mean that like a pine tree is also a conifer?
Correct. That is a pine. Pine tree is a conifer. So let's see if I can actually get to
Pines, firs, evergreen trees generally, right? The ones that don't lose their leaves.
Yes, exactly. So let's see if I can find I have another good plant evolution thought. Well, anyway, I'll find it some other time. So yeah, it's very, so basically conifers are, so yeah, all pine trees, all the trees that you see, mainly in the Northwest, are conifers. So it's only like the big leaf maples, or a lot more street trees that we plant around, that are deciduous trees, but they're deciduous because they're angiosperms, right? So the reason they lose their leaves is different. Conifers actually lose their needles. Needles are in their case are their leaves. And conifers lose their leaves about, once, it depends on the tree, but they lose their leaves maybe 5 years at a time, where deciduous trees like maples, they lose their leaves every year, as another adaptation, right? Because why would you not want your big juicy leaves on all through the winter? Just as a thought. What
You're muted.
What might you lose if you have all that out there through the winter?
Well, isn't it trying to like keep energy and keep water during winter?
Yep, exactly. So, and conifers don't do that as much because they, but then again, they also don't produce flowers, right? So there's a huge energy investment that comes with making flowers and pollen and all these things. So that's why a lot of angiosperms that are trees lose their leaves too, because they want to preserve all that energy. They don't want to lose nutrients and water and all these things that in the wintertime they're really not using because they're not growing, right? That's the other thing, is that plants don't grow all year long. Now they're loving it. This is exactly the time of year that they do all their growth. But come the winter, yes, they do shut down. So very good.
There's also the point, right, about if all that water freezes, it weighs significantly more. And so you have things like, trees buckling under that extra weight and stuff like that, which is another adaptive measure, right, to be able to make it through the winter without all those leaves bearing the weight of the snow and ice, right, and then snapping the tree.
Exactly. And so, yeah, all those things, and those are things that plants had to do and had to change. And I think that, it's interesting to look at how, like flowers, for example, right? The earliest angiosperm, the earliest flower, and that's why I wanted to show this trillium, and actually I'll just quickly pull it up one more time. So that's where, the trillium's amazing because it's a very old angiosperm. And I'm going to draw just down here an example. So, and with trillium, you can really see, so every, the evolution of flowers came about due to leaves, right? So every flower that you see is actually just a modified leaf. So in the case of the trillium, I'm going to draw, let's see. Okay. In the case of the trillium, you've got these big flowers that actually, the reason why the flower, like the petals themselves are so big, is actually because their earliest pollinators, and actually in this case their latest pollinators, are actually beetles. So in order for the beetle to be able to pollinate or get into the trillium, the leaf's got to be pretty big, right? Because if it was a small leaf, there wouldn't be any room for the beetle to get in there. But that's what why the trillium has such a big leaf, is to support that insect. Now, another example of that are magnolias. Magnolias are also early angiosperms, and then you'll notice those big flowers. That's because they had to evolve to support big beetles that I'm sure back in the day were even bigger. So trillium are also really cool, I think, because in addition, so in the early spring, when you often see them, they're white, right? They're white. They're coming out first. They've got their flower parts with pollen. Well, when they're white like that, they're attracting a specific kind of insect, which is a small pollinating fly. So basically, when they're early in the season, that's who's pollinating them. But because they only put out one flower, and maybe some of you guys know, trillium are, and this is part of their back to their evolution, they're very slow to germinate and mature. So they're actually, they really need to get pollinated, because if that one flower doesn't yield pollination, then they're done. No more trillium babies. So that's where trillium have an amazing adaptation, though, to ensure that, because the flies like the white, but then in the later times, like right now, these leaves turn purple. Now, why would a leaf change, or a flower in this case, which is a modified leaf, why would it change color? Or why might we think? What would be the advantage to changing your color?
Won't they deter things depending on color?
Good thought. Color might be a warning signal, yes, like some insects, and we'll talk about that later. But actually, in this case, it's actually attracting a different insect. So it's attracting beetles in this case instead of flies. And so that's, I think, one example of an amazing way that a plant has figured out, oh, I need to change my color. So that means that if I didn't get pollinated by flies earlier, I'm definitely going to get pollinated, hopefully, by a beetle. So that's just some ways that I think, you know, we can see, wow, okay, they're really working to make sure that they get what they need, but also, you know, they attract the insects that that are looking for what they need. So anyway, that's just kind of the quick overview of plant evolution. And I think that, you know, this is a good starting point for us to think about, you know, lots of aspects of life. And we'll come back to this. And I know this is pretty, you know, pretty intense science. So I want to make sure, you know, to leave room for questions or other things that you're interested in, because this is a lot of information, and I just want to make sure it's being understood. So yeah, anybody, can I clarify anything else, or does that seem to make sense to people? How plants came to land? Could you tell it to me if I asked you? Maybe by the end. Okay. Well, while we're at the end here, I do want to get a quick share, because I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, as we're already going over here, but I appreciate you sticking with us. And yeah, but I do want to see your maps, if that's possible.
You're muted, Xavier.
Can I screen share?
If one of us can make you.
I am making him co-host. So there
Great.
you go. And then you just go to the share screen button.
Share screen. Yeah.
Nice.
Should be that one. Share. So
What? We're not muted.
okay.
The moment
So
we unmute, you go.
this is my house. This is the bottom floor of my house. I'm not very good at drawing, so it's kind of large scale in what it is. Here's my porch. There's a restroom here. Living room. It's definitely not that big, but it takes up from wall to wall. Kitchen, dining room leads out to the porch. There's the parents' room. There's the stairs to upstairs. The office, and I do have and I open up the upstairs.
Oh, you did 2 logs.
Well, yeah. It's loading. I hope you guys can see this well.
It's coming.
It's good. There it is. So there's the stairs, restroom, my room with my brother, my sister's room, and then the game room. On outside, we have this huge garden that we spend. Oh, we've spent so many years on the garden, and it takes forever. And then we have a side garden along with that, beyond the fence line that goes here. And we have our spices in the front yard. We have a nice trees and flowers in the front and the side over here. Yeah, herb garden. Sorry.
We're not growing herbs though.
Over here.
Oh, and
In the side garden.
whatever. Mint isn't an herb; it's a leaf.
But okay. Anyway,
All right.
and we have our carpet ball table, which we love out in the back. And I think that's it.
Nice. Very good. Well done. Gives me a better sense of the lay. How about you, Courtney? Did you get yours to work?
I just turned it in like not 2 minutes ago.
Okay.
I
Can you
had to
show it?
have my mom help me because I was having some technical difficulties and all that. It was, yay.
Good job. Way to get it done.
Yep.
So, I mean, Graham, you could probably open it and then screen share so that we can.
Sure. I gotta get back into Canvas here. So, yeah, so this is great. I really appreciate you guys engaging in the activity. And this will be, this is really just a teaser for what we're going to get into. And, I wanted to show you just one example so you can see what we're working on here. Okay, hold on, Canvas home.
And while you're queuing that up, I'll just say, let me reiterate that, like, if you want to make your work up that's missing, for me, I'd recommend doing that sooner rather than later before it builds up, right? Because at this point, it's still the sort of thing where you could like devote an hour or two in the evening and totally be caught up. And I'm going to be putting scores up this week too, so sort of the sooner the better makes it easier on my end. But I've in my normal classes had students, right, who will sort of procrastinate, and then by the end, all those 2-paragraph responses have built themselves up into something like, an essay or two's worth of writing, and so you don't want to do that to yourself. You do have another reading and response due for me tonight for our next class. It's the Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack or White Privilege Checklist. It is on Canvas, and for the few folks we have who are still having problems with their Canvas accounts, I have created another slideshow, so I will be sending out the PDF and slideshow link over email after our session is over here. But I am just sort of concerned how many people are missing those initial 2 responses, just because I'm like, well, if that becomes a pattern, right, that would be kind of bad news by the end. Plus, those things are worth quite a lot more than even daily attendance in terms of your stipend.
Yeah, and we didn't get to bring Sweetgrass today, but that's, we had a lot of content to cover, and so you guys just keep, for me, keep reading and choose from chapters 8 through 15, and then at the end of the week we'll talk about both reading sections all in one. So hopefully with more folks available. So I got the submissions. Courtney, I'm going to screen share your map because it's awesome. So can everybody see Courtney's map? And yes, you did a good job utilizing what I had kind of the key. So kudos on that. I really like this use of the garden there and there, as well as the green trees. It gives me a much better sense of the overall makeup of the landscape. The cars, nice touch. I can see you got 4 of them. That's requires a nice big carport, so that makes sense. And yeah, the chicken coop, that's really cool. Definitely something of value that
we built the chicken coop ourselves.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and the trees do not give it enough justice. We are surrounded.
Nice. Well, that's good. Well, we'll get to IDing those trees next time. Yeah, so great job.
And this is all on like 1 acre of land.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's very cool. And these gardens, can you tell us a little bit about that, since we heard about Xavier's gardens?
Okay, so the ones in the back here, they're my stepdad's plants that he's growing for some of his spices. I think he's got some peppers and some cucumbers growing up back there. And then in the front here, we've got some corn and some onions growing.
Nice.
Yum.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I will just share then the, let's see, I think I've got the last, I've only got 3 submissions. So if you got anybody who didn't get their submission in today who is here, let's make sure we get that in.
Wait, who do we email it to?
Oh, if you can upload it to Canvas, that would be best. That's where I downloaded it from, and that's the easiest place for Amr and I to access all the stuff. So
yeah, that's why I'm doing even the slideshows as opposed to just letting folks email me, because it gets really hard to keep track of all those individual emails.
Yeah. So here's looks like Allie's. Let me see if I can share this real quick. Allie did a very nice map. Once again, using the upstairs and the downstairs. So that's cool. We got the garden here. And this is a neat feature. You did something like kind of a call out, you know, so you did like the larger context of the house and the surrounding area, and then you did, you know, kind of an inset of the breakdown of the upstairs and downstairs, which is really cool. That's a really good way to communicate more information, you know, on kind of the zoomed in level. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your piece?
Like what?
Oh, just anything you want to share. I'll ask you one question. What's your what's furthest along in your garden?
I think the beans right now.
Okay, nice. Well, that's very cool. You got a greenhouse too?
Yep.
Creating all sorts of starts. That's awesome. Nice.
I guess one interesting thing would be that my grandma and grandpa actually built the house.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's what year did they build it?
I have no idea.
No idea. Okay, that's fine. Well, cool. That's more history, and we might not have gotten to know that unless you made a map. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think those are all the submissions I have. So submit yours if you haven't, and submit your brain sweetgrass summary if you haven't done that already too, from last week, and then another one will be due on Thursday. So that's all for me. We'll get back to this and more cool plant stuff next time.
Mm-hmm. Probably we'll pick up with some seminar next time.
Yeah.
The reading that you did for today, those of you who submitted your response already at least, and the reading that you got coming up, I've actually got a real specific type of activity I do with that, and it may be that the drawing activity has to get set to the wayside. We'll just sort of see how we do with time. Hopefully just no more technical difficulties now that we're at least set up on a consistently working Zoom session. I don't want to hold you any longer though. We've already cut like almost half an hour into your lunch, which I feel horrible about. I really do appreciate you hanging with us. And yeah, just to reiterate, Xavier asked if you could share the PowerPoint. So Graham, if you grab the class list off of one of those mass emails and email it out to everybody.
I think I'm just going to put it on Canvas, if that's okay.
Yep. You could upload it to announcements, actually, and they would all see it super easily there.
Cool.
Okay. I'm going to shut the room down, and I'll see you all again Wednesday morning.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.